This is East Asia Tonight.
Good Friday evening, I'm Mateli with tonight's top stories from East Asia. China and Indonesia are deepening cooperation from trade and energy to defense. Beijing says military ties are at a new starting point. Now, Japan protests a Russian missile test near the disputed Kuril Islands that simulated an attack on enemy ships. The US and South Korea wrap up annual military drills 6 days early on President Trump's order as a gesture towards Pyongyang. But North Korea says it's not enough to restart talks. 2 Hong Kong activists linked to Tiananmen commemorations have been found guilty of inciting subversion. They face up to 10 years in prison with sentencing to come. And the union at South Korea's largest automaker, Hyundai, stages its first full-day strike in a decade as long-running talks with management stall. Also ahead, China dominates the lithium-ion battery supply chain, but a technology built around one of the world's most abundant elements could offer countries and firms a way to diversify. China and Indonesia are stepping up defense and economic cooperation as their foreign and defense ministers lead the country's first comprehensive and strategic dialogue in Jakarta. Our top Chinese diplomat Wang Yi and his Indonesian counterpart Sugiarno launched a new bilateral mechanism to strengthen cooperation across 5 key areas: political, economic, security, maritime, and people-to-people relations. Jakarta is seeking to balance its ties with Beijing and Washington while attracting more investment. Well, here to share more, we have CNA's senior correspondent, Chatni Vatwani, who is in Jakarta, and Rebecca Mateo in Beijing. Well, welcome, ladies. I'm going to kick things off with you first, Chatni. This is the first comprehensive and strategic dialogue for China and Indonesia. Just walk us through just how significant this meeting is.
That's right, Telly. This is the very first comprehensive strategic dialogue meeting between China and Indonesia. And in fact, it is the very first CSD between Indonesia and any other country. So this meeting certainly extremely significant. We know that there are plans in the pipeline for other CSDs with other countries. And while details of what those countries are have not been released yet, all eyes certainly watching and paying close attention on this particular meeting and the precedent it sets. Now, we know the two launched a new bilateral mechanism to strengthen cooperation across 5 pillars. That's political, economic, security, maritime, and people-to-people relations. And China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi said Indonesia and China agreed to better coordinate on major development and security priorities with aims to provide strong safeguards for the modernization of both countries, saying that they will jointly oppose unilateral bullying and power politics, and that their bilateral dialogue will send a clear signal to the world of solidarity and cooperation between the two countries. Meanwhile, Minister Sugiarno stated that the two discussed several key issues, including the architecture of their bilateral cooperation, and the two agreed to revitalize strategic mechanisms in a bunch of areas, including trade, energy, minerals, maritime affairs, all while establishing new mechanisms as well in divisions such as artificial intelligence. Now, China and Indonesia also looking to intensify relations and advance economic cooperation, with Minister Sugiarno saying Indonesia continues to value China's commitment to the country's economic development through increased trade and investment. Take a listen.
Beberapa waktu yang lalu, rating agency dari Tiongkok memberikan sebuah penilaian yang sempurna terhadap iklim investasi di Indonesia, dan untuk itu kami juga menyampaikan ucapan terima kasih yang sebesar-besarnya kepada Tiongkok.
It's worth noting the Indonesian government is taking over a controlling stake in the company operating a more than $7 billion China-funded high-speed railway, and an appointed agency will be responsible for repaying the project's outstanding loan, but it will not use funds from the state budget. Mr. Sugiono's remarks regarding the investment climate also come in the aftermath of MSCI warning Indonesia that it risks a downgrade to frontier market status in the event of failing to demonstrate progress in reforms.
Right, Rebecca, let's bring you into the conversation now because we want to hear Beijing's perspective. What exactly are we hearing about how China sees this relationship and where it wants to take it?
Well, for sure, Telly, but first, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi and Defense Minister Dong Jun first had separate meetings with their Indonesian counterparts before all four of them came together to discuss political, defense, as well as security issues. And Beijing calls it China's first ministerial 2+2 mechanism of its kind with another country. And as with regard to, the perspective, Beijing's perspective is that analysts say Indonesia is increasingly becoming important in Beijing's calculations, especially as U.S.-China competition intensifies. And China sees this as an opportunity to deepen not just economic ties, but also strategic and security cooperation as well. And it comes amid stepped-up engagement between China and Indonesia in recent years. And this has really broadened beyond trade and investment. And at the meeting, Wang also announced another step forward, that is the two sides will begin consultations on a 5-year action plan between 2027 to 2030, with Beijing saying it hopes that both countries can reach an agreement soon. And the two sides also agreed to uphold what Beijing calls a strategic autonomy and support each other's core interests. And analysts are saying that for China, the idea of strategic autonomy is particularly important. That's because countries can choose to pursue their own foreign policies rather than choosing sides between major powers as U.S.-China competition intensifies. So Wang has made it clear that Beijing sees this relationship as significance well beyond the two countries.
两国合作在百年变局下，已经超越双边的范畴。 正在对地区和世界产生广泛和积极的影响。这次机制会议的成功，将为深化我们全方位的战略合作、高水平的推进命运共同体的建设提供重要的支撑，并且向世界发出我们两大新兴市场国家 团结合作的明确的信号。
Now, this broader strategic relationship is also extending into defense. So China Defense Minister Dong Jun called China-Indonesia defense cooperation as a potential model for the global south. Well, China also called for deeper military ties, but did not spell out what cooperation could look like. But for a bit of context, just about a week ago, their navies conducted drills east of Taiwan, and China called it a joint navigation exercise to strengthen operational capabilities, while Indonesia characterized it as a routine passing exercise by a frigate returning from Russia and stressed that it was not related to any war fighting. Let's have a listen on what the defense minister has to say.
必将有力地提升捍卫两国国家核心利益的能力，坚决挫败外部势力干涉和危害国家主权的 图谋行径，为全球南方国家开展新型防务合作呢树立典范。
So, Chutney, both sides clearly have lots to talk about, and that's why we have this 2+2 meeting that's scheduled for this afternoon between the foreign ministers and defense ministers. What should we expect coming out of this meeting?
Well, we know that this morning Chinese Defense Minister Dong Jun met with Indonesian Defense Minister Shafri Samsudin and said both countries' militaries could work together to boost their ability in protecting national interests and prevent external threats. Indonesian Defense Minister meanwhile stated that there would be increased defense activities between both militaries, including joint exercises and officer exchanges, plus partnerships in the defense industry. Now, the 2+2 dialogue is expected to focus on strengthening political, defense, and security cooperation at the bilateral, regional, and global levels. So we'll be keeping a close watch on that.
And Rebecca, I mean, beyond security, what else is China looking for from its economic relationship with Indonesia? And also, how does this all fit into Beijing's wider regional strategy?
Well, both said that both of them agreed on more balanced and sustainable trade, especially when it comes to deeper cooperation across AI, energy, as well as minerals. Now, just last month, China's Foreign Minister Wang also met Indonesia's coordinating economic minister to discuss about Chinese investments, supply chains, as well as emerging industries. And China is already Indonesia's largest trading partner with major investments across manufacturing, infrastructure, EV supply chain, and nickel. For that, Indonesian President Prabowo is pushing for greater economic self-reliance and control over Indonesia's resources, and that led to tighter nickel mining quotas as well as regulatory changes to which have raised costs for Chinese companies. And during that meeting last month, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has called on Indonesia to ensure a fair business environment for Chinese companies. So analysts are really saying that Beijing wants to protect its existing economic interests while also advancing all these new areas of economic cooperation. And the bigger backdrop to this meeting is really that APEC is coming up very soon in China, with China as the host, and it does expect Indonesia to play a role in it, and especially on free trade, multilateralism, and global South cooperation. So analysts are saying that Indonesia, as a major ASEAN country, is an important player regionally and globally for China. Let's have a listen.
If China can engage Indonesia and at least get Indonesia to be more free and open, i.e. in terms of its foreign policy orientation, it actually feeds into the Chinese narrative that this is the type of multilateralism that it wants to see being exercised on the international stage. But again, we also have to bear in mind that Indonesia has its own national interests at heart.
Well, thanks, ladies, for helping us unpack China-Indonesian relations. We were just talking to CNA's Rebecca Mateo in Beijing and Chatni Vatvani in Jakarta. In other news, Japan has lodged a protest with Russia over a missile test near the disputed Kuril Islands. It comes on the heels of a diplomatic flare-up last week after President Vladimir Putin visited one of the islands known as Iturap in Russia. Now, Japan's protest followed Russia's notification of the missile test, which Moscow says it has since carried out. It reportedly hit all its targets at a range of at least 300 kilometers. The exercise, simulating an attack on enemy ships, was conducted by Russia's Pacific Fleet and involved a nuclear-powered submarine and a guided missile cruiser. The missile test used a surface-to-ship system deployed to one of Kuril Islands. Japan's foreign minister, Toshimitsu Motegi, says that Tokyo cannot accept Moscow strengthening its military presence on the 4 islands known in Japan as the Northern Territories. He added that such moves go against Japan's position on the disputed territory. Now, Russia summoned Japan's ambassador earlier over Tokyo's protest against Mr. Putin's visit. Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi had called Mr. Putin's visit absolutely unacceptable. She said that the islands are Japanese territory under history and international law. Well, the dispute dates all the way back to the final days of World War II. Soviet forces seized the 4 islands in 1945. The territorial row has kept Japan and Russia from signing a formal post-war peace treaty. Decades of talks have also failed to produce a resolution. Coming up next on East Asia Tonight, Samsung Electronics parceling out dividends to shareholders to the tune of $22 billion for its third quarter, and there's more for a later payout. Plus, foreign ownership of Japanese equities reached a fresh record in the last fiscal year as overseas interest continues. Hello Hello again. Good to have your company this Friday evening. Well, you're just in time for business news with none other than Olivia Marzuki. And seems like it's a bumper year for Samsung shareholders, it seems.
That's right. I'll tell you, bumper year it is. So Samsung company shares and returns have shot up, and therefore the board is approving a large cash payout. Samsung Electronics has done its sums and laid out how much it could return to shareholders this year. And that's as the AI boom fueled a surge in its chip profits. The Korean tech giant says up to $79.5 billion is available for shareholders this year. The final amount will depend on its business performance, investment, and cash flow. For the third quarter, Samsung plans to distribute about $21.7 billion in cash dividends, and the board will decide the remaining payouts in January next year. So cash dividends, share buybacks, and share cancellations are all on the table for investors. Samsung certainly has the cash. Its chip profit hit about $64 billion in the second quarter, around 250 times higher than a year earlier. And the two biggest Korean memory chip makers are building a formidable war chest. Samsung and SK Hynix are expected to have a combined $263 billion in net cash by the end of 2026. That's more than double NVIDIA's estimated cash pile. Samsung shares traded nearly 4% higher today, and the stock has surged about 300% in the past 12 months. A private sector survey shows Japan's manufacturing sector expanding in August, with new orders rising at their fastest pace in more than 8 years. The preliminary S&P Global Flash PMI index rose to 55.1 this month from 54.5 back in July. 50 mark separates growth and contraction. Growth momentum picked up across manufacturing and services, but it was factories that continued to lead growth. That's with manufacturers seeing the steepest increase in total sales and overseas demand in more than 8.5 years. This was particularly strong in semiconductor and AI-related industries. On the consumer side, Japan's core inflation increased last month as companies passed on higher costs due to a weak yen and Iran war. This makes a stronger case for the Bank of Japan to lift interest rates when it meets next month. Overall CPI, which excludes volatile fresh foods, jumped 1.9%, while core CPI is up 1.8%. The readings remain below the central bank's target due to government subsidies, but analysts expect inflation to exceed that target in the coming months as higher raw material costs broaden. Foreign investors are taking a record share of Japan's stock market, with AI-related firms and companies targeted by activist investors seeing some of the biggest gains. Foreign investors were net buyers of slightly more than $65 billion worth of Japanese stocks in fiscal 2025, close to 22-year high. Overseas investors held 34.7% of Japanese stocks in fiscal 2025, marking a record for the third straight year. Now, among companies on the Tokyo Stock Exchange's prime market, foreign investors and ownership grew at 737 firms. The prime sector and section includes the larger and more liquid firms. Audio equipment maker Foster Electric recorded the largest increase, with overseas holdings jumping nearly 25 percentage points to 44.4%. Singapore-based activist fund Axiom Capital was its largest shareholder as of the end of March. AI-related stocks also attracted strong foreign interest. Overseas holdings in Furukawa Electric rose nearly 20 percentage points, supported by growing sales in fiber optic cables used in AI data centers. Stocks in Japan dipped into the red with concerns over inflation and higher oil prices. The Nikkei 225 ending the final trading day of the week about 0.3% underwater. And in China, the benchmark indices ended the day in the green, with investors taking heed of Beijing's latest promises of more fiscal measures. Chinese property stocks gain momentum, reacting to the support measures for the housing market. China is promising more support for its slowing economy, preparing additional fiscal measures in the second half of the year. Vice Finance Minister Liao Min says more government spending will be directed towards households and consumption. Separately, the Finance Ministry has expanded interest subsidies for small businesses and consumers. Eligible small firms will receive a 1 percentage point subsidy on loan interest for up to 2 years. The scheme has also been extended to cover credit card installment plans. The latest steps build on pledges made at last month's Politburo meeting, where leaders called for faster spending on already approved infrastructure projects rather than rolling out major new stimulus. Beijing has set a budget deficit target of around 4% of GDP this year and plans to speed up government bond issuance to support growth. Shanghai's Star 50 index has benefited from an investor surge into Chinese tech stocks, outperforming rivals by the largest margin since it was first established. The Star 50, which includes leading stocks on the city's star market, has risen 23% this year. It is well ahead of Shenzhen's tech index, which is up only 10%, and Hong Kong's Hang Seng Tech Index, which is down 14%. Top companies have chosen to list in Shanghai recently following the government's concerns about capital flight. The star market started in 2019 as China redoubled efforts to finance domestic innovation. The market kept requirements flexible, enabling companies involved in, quote, hard technology, such as robots, to list relatively quickly. Now, this helped Shanghai become a hub for the country's rapidly growing semiconductor sector. The widening gap in Chinese equity benchmarks mirrors a global trend where investors are rewarding companies supplying infrastructure behind the AI boom. Union workers at South Korea's largest car maker staged their first full strike in a decade after wage talks with management collapsed. Workers are demanding a higher retirement age, bigger bonuses, and protections against AI and automation. CNA senior correspondent Lim Yun-suk has this report.
Thousands of union workers at Hyundai Motor gathered outside the company's headquarters in Seoul as the one-day strike got underway at its plants across the country. Hyundai's union says about 38,000 of its members joined the walkout nationwide, with about 3,000 gathering for the rally here in the capital, including members from Hyundai's affiliate Kia and supplier companies. They want the retirement age raised from the current 60 to 65, as South Korea grapples with being one of the world's fastest aging countries. And they're also calling for bonuses to be raised to 800% of monthly base salary, up from 750%.
지난 10년 동안 파업단 파업 제대로 하지 않았습니다. 노동조합이 파업을 할 줄 몰라서 안 했겠습니까? 미래가 전쟁인 노사관계와 지금까지 39년 동안 갈등과 대립을 극복하기 위해서 파업을 자제해왔을 뿐입니다. 하지만 교섭위원들의 사만조원들의 질벽한 요구사항들을 서측은 철저히 무시했습니다.
The workers are also concerned that their jobs could be threatened amid Hyundai's plans to deploy humanoid robots at its U.S. plant in Georgia from 2028, with plans to expand their use across its production sites.
지금 그 아틀라스라는 로봇이 이제 문제가 되고 있고 그 로봇이 어떻게 산업 현장에 들어오느냐라는 부분에 사실은 되게 초미의 관심사입니다. 로봇이 아주 쉽게 짐을 싣고 내리고 움직이는 부분들을 통해서 노동조합이 조합원들의 고용이라는 부분에 가장 다가와 있는 부분인 것 같고요.
Friday's walkout follows a series of partial strikes since late July that have already disrupted production of more than 55,000 vehicles worth over 2.3 trillion won, or about $1.67 billion US, according to local reports. Experts say this could be a new headache for the car maker, as Hyundai's global sales fell 4% in the second quarter, with China down a third and sales at home down 16%, even as growth continued in North America and India. But Hyundai is not alone. Workers at some of South Korea's biggest companies are increasingly demanding a bigger share of soaring corporate profits, many of them linked to the AI boom. Union workers at car maker Kia are threatening to strike too. Samsung Electronics workers nearly walked out earlier this year over AI-driven profits. And the union at the country's largest steelmaker, POSCO, has now secured the legal right to strike too, raising the risk of its first ever walkout in 58 years if talks fail. Im Yan-suk, CNA, Seoul.
Well, that's a wrap in business for your edition this Friday.
Oh, thanks so very much for that, Olivia. Right, coming up next on East Asia Tonight, Japan deepens defense ties with Australia and India, from warships and weapons testing to AI and military technology. What does this tell us about Tokyo's emerging defense strategy? An expert joins us next. You're watching East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Chinese and Indonesian defense and foreign ministers leading their countries' first ever comprehensive and strategic dialogue in Jakarta, stepping up cooperation on a number of fronts, including political, economic, and people-to-people relations. The US and South Korea wrap up their joint military drills 6 days early on President Trump's order, a move seen as an effort by Washington to lower tensions with North Korea. Plus, a Hong Kong court fined 2 activists who organized the city's Tiananmen vigils guilty of inciting subversion. The sentencing will come at a later date, with both facing a maximum of 10 years in jail. Japan's defense minister Shinjiro Koizumi has wrapped up a 2-stop tour aimed at deepening Tokyo's regional defense ties. In India, Mr. Koizumi and his counterpart Rajnath Singh reaffirmed their commitment to a free and open Indo-Pacific. The two countries exploring ways to deepen coordination between their armed forces. Now, Prime Minister Narendra Modi said on social media that he had an excellent conversation with the Japanese defense minister on deepening security ties, calling the partnership an important anchor for regional stability. Now, Mr. Koizumi also announced significant progress in defense cooperation with Australia. Canberra may soon allow Tokyo to test its hypersonic missiles in Australia after they agreed to increase information sharing. Mr. Koizumi also noted the steady progress on a deal for Australia to buy 11 frigates from Japan. Well, lots to unpack here. So we are joined now by Tomohiko Taniguchi, Special Advisor at the Fujitsu Future Study Center and former Special Advisor to the late Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Well, thanks, Professor, for joining us this evening. So let's just start with the bigger picture question here. Help us define the scale of transformation for Japan. I mean, is Tokyo becoming a fundamentally different kind of military power?
So long as Japan's constitution remains unchanged, there is no right of belligerence that Japan could exercise. And so that would put Japan in a very much special category. What's changed, although, is that Japan is no longer on the receiving end of the security equation. It is to enhance the bilateral relationships respectively with Australia and with India in order not to decrease the role that the U.S.-Japan alliance has played, but to enhance also the U.S.-Japan relationship, because the access, if you like, that Japan has had with the United States is going to be the linchpin now and going forward. The relationships that Japan has developed with Australia and with India would only enhance the U.S.-Japan and alliance and the presence of the United States in the Indo-Pacific theater.
Right. Well, it's interesting that you're saying this is to enhance U.S.-Japan relationship, because there are concerns as well, according to some reports, that Japan now cannot assume that the U.S. will always have, say, enough, missiles or other munitions available in a major conflict.
I think it is very much a short-term phenomenon. Long-term, the fact will remain that the United States is going to be the biggest and the most influential military presence in the Indo-Pacific region. And which country is hosting the largest military footprint of the United States? That is nothing but Japan. So Japan is responsible of guiding the United States, if you like, to continue to get engaged in the Indo-Pacific theater. That's the role that Japan has chosen to play.
And also, well, do you think Japan is effectively also, trying to build this network of security partners around China? I mean, is it going too far to describe them as quasi-allies?
No single nation, including the United States, could possibly counterbalance China, which is becoming a behemoth in military terms. So it's very much sensible for countries like Japan to work as a alliance enhancer, alliance multiplier, if you like, by bringing Japan closer to those nations such as India and Australia.
Right. And let's just turn specifically to India now. It seems like it's a particularly interesting partner because, India seems to have a strong preference for domestic production. It sort of still relies on Russian origin equipment. So where do you see the realistic opportunities for Japan and India to work together?
Well, India is faced with China, and India could ill afford having two enemies at the same time, like Russia and China. So it's very much understandable for India to stay sort of neutral between those two nations. For Japan, the India-Japan relationship is a long-term investment. The late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, when he spoke about the confluence of the two seas back in 2007, set the tone that India-Japan relationship is all about the future, not about the immediate present.
And I want to pick up on the recent announcement, which is Japan seeking this record defense budget for fiscal 2027. There's a price tag there. But I mean, how much more does Japan actually need to spend to build a credible, independent deterrent, rather than sort of responding to pressure from Washington?
Well, as much as necessary would be an appropriate answer. Numerical targets such as 2.5% as opposed to GDP may be important, but what's more important is for Japan to equip itself with necessary capabilities, including making Japanese military bases more resilient and enhancing Japan's cyber technologies more up to date, and so on and so forth. And in terms of Japanese defense export, it's just begun. It's like a toddler, and there's a long way to go for Japan.
Meantime, I just want to pick up on what Beijing is saying. I mean, they're seeing all of this quite very differently, basically arguing that Japan is using the deteriorating regional security environment to justify remilitarization. I mean, do moves like these actually reinforce the argument?
Well, the envelope has been pushed for the last 20, 25 years from a single source. That's Japan. That's not Japan, but that's China. And China's defense buildup is the largest in terms of scale recorded in human history. And so even the United States can not afford counterbalancing Chinese military power alone by itself. So Japan needs to do its own share, and Japan needs to broaden its alliance and partnership network, including such countries as Australia and India.
Well, it's been great speaking to you. Always offer us some really good insights. Tomohiko Taniguchi, Special Advisor at the Fujitsu Future Studies Center and former Special Advisor to the late Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. The United States and South Korea have wrapped up key military exercises nearly a week earlier than planned. Now, the move follows an order by U.S. President Donald Trump to scale back the drills in what's widely seen as a conciliatory gesture towards North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. The Ulchi Freedom Shield exercise was cut to 5 days from the planned 11. Counter-attack drills planned for the second week were reportedly cancelled. Well, that leaves this year's exercise focused mainly on defensive operations. Now, the drills are one of two major combined exercises held each year, and they are designed to prepare military forces for contingencies against North Korea. But Pyongyang has dismissed the reduction. Kim Jong-un's sister, Kim Yo-jong, said that the shorter exercise does not change what she called its provocative, aggressive nature. Now, she also accused Seoul of being put in a poor plight by Washington's decision. South Korea, in response to Ms. Kim's remarks, called on the North to stop unnecessary slander and to work together for peace on the Korean peninsula. Now, Mr. Trump ordered the reduction on Sunday, saying that the drills could send an inappropriate and hostile message to Pyongyang. He also pointed to their cost and his great relationship with Kim Jong-un. The U.S. leader said that he expects to meet Mr. Kim again later this year. But North Korea's actions have sent quite a different signal. Just yesterday, it fired roughly a dozen short-range ballistic missiles from the Pyongyang area. Now, the missiles flew about 300 kilometers towards the East Sea. South Korea said that it has strengthened surveillance and is coordinating closely with the U.S. and Japan. Seoul has condemned the launches and ordered its military to maintain full readiness. Its National Security Council also called on North Korea to halt the missile tests. Two activists who organized Hong Kong's Tiananmen vigils have been found guilty of inciting subversion. The verdict is the latest involving the Chinese territory's national security law. A court in West Kowloon handed down the ruling to a packed courtroom earlier today in a hearing that lasted less than an hour. Chow Han-tung and Lee Chuk-yen led a now disbanded group that organized vigils commemorating the 1989 Tiananmen Square incident in Beijing. Well, the candlelight event attracted tens of thousands of people every year in Hong Kong until it was banned in 2020 during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, the activists have been in custody since 2021 and will be sentenced at a later date together with a third defendant, Albert Ho, who pleaded guilty in January. They face a maximum sentence of 10 years in jail. Our chief executive, John Lee, said that the group had planted seeds of hatred against China's Communist Party and Hong Kong government. The Hong Kong Security Secretary had this to say.
A lot of people try to making an excuse that they are not doing any illegal act, but they just try to express their will. But I think the first point made by the court make it very clear that it's nothing to do with their political wills and beliefs. It's all because of evidence and law.
Well, coming up next on East Asia Tonight, could salt be the key to breaking China's grip on batteries? Well, an analyst will be joining us to explore the promise and limits of sodium-ion technology. Lithium-ion batteries, commonly found in everyday devices such as smartphones and laptops, to electric vehicles and solar storage systems, have transformed how the world stores energy. But they have also led to a major concentration of industrial power. Now, China has built a commanding position across key parts of the sector, leaving governments and companies searching for ways to diversify. Now, one possible answer could come from something remarkably ordinary: salt, more specifically sodium. It's also far more abundant and can be extracted from seawater, potentially easing the raw material constraints that have shaped the lithium battery industry. But the technology itself isn't new, because researchers have been working on sodium batteries for decades now. What's changing in recent years is the push to commercialize it. Firms are scaling sodium-based batteries for applications where its size and weight are not a priority, such as for electricity grids and data centers. And that's because sodium-ion still has a disadvantage compared with their lithium-ion counterpart. Given the same weight, it cannot store as much energy, limiting its appeal for applications such as certain types of electric vehicles. But given its potential, an industry around it is already taking shape. American companies are investing in the tech and manufacturing capacity. But the U.S. is not alone in this race. China already has the world's largest battery production ecosystem, with major Chinese players also developing and pushing out sodium-ion battery products. So what will it take to turn this technology into a real competitor to lithium-ion, and who is best placed to win the race? Well, to help us understand a bit more about this, let's bring in Dr. Varnika Agarwal, a senior battery research analyst from Benchmark Mineral Intelligence. Well, thanks, Dr. Agarwal, for joining us this evening. So let's just make this real for drivers. Okay, so for people who don't follow battery technology closely, help us understand, what would a sodium-ion battery actually mean on the road for an everyday EV driver? What's the difference?
So in terms of sodium ion, the mechanism of how sodium ion and lithium ion works is kind of same. It just uses different raw materials. So sodium ion doesn't use your traditional lithium metal or your nickel, cobalt, critical minerals. But when we are looking in terms of energy densities, as you were mentioning, sodium ion has lower energy density than your current lithium ion batteries. For electric vehicles, energy density, fast charging capability, and life cycle are key performance metrics. So that is where sodium ion is still currently lagging behind. But for example, for stationary storage application where energy density is not the massive requirement, the life cycle and cost are the primary drivers. That is where sodium ion seems to be now fitting more prominently in.
Right, and I want to talk about CATL. Well, they're about to deliver its first sodium-ion storage systems in September, and material costs have also apparently been halved. So if that happens in September, how big a moment is this for the industry?
So that is going to be a huge moment because sodium ion became popular in 2022 when lithium prices were very high. Since then, sodium ion was not becoming that popular due to the declining lithium prices. But recently, with the lithium surge prices, we are seeing that interest again. But when we're talking about the technology innovation as well, since 2022, sodium ion has come a long way. So earlier, we were looking at 130 to 140 watt-hour per kg energy density. In terms of cycle life performance, we were looking around 1,000 to 3,000 cycles. But now CATL is promising around 15,000 cycles at 25 degrees centigrade and 10,000 cycles at 45 degrees centigrade with half cost. With cost, I would say that the cell level costs have decreased, but the pack level costs are still high. So cost is going to be a primary factor on how the CATL tenor system is going to be showing up in the demand numbers.
Right, and then there's also the supply chain question, because there are all these reports, describing sodium ion as a potentially China-free battery technology. As somebody like you who is tracking, this critical mineral supply chains, how realistic is that claim?
This is a statement we have to take with a pinch of salt, because when we are talking it's a China-free battery, it's because of the materials that's going to go in sodium-ion batteries. It doesn't use your traditional lithium, cobalt, nickel, or your graphite anode as an anode active material. It uses hard carbon and a different set of cathode chemistries, which are widely available globally. So for example, hard carbon can be produced from your coconut shells, biomass, which are easily available worldwide. Similarly, sodium, as you were mentioning, it's salt, it's widely available across the globe. So the supply chain can be independent of China. But currently, if we look at the major producers for those anode active materials and cathode active materials that are going to be utilized in your sodium ion batteries, they're majorly confined to China. So even though it can be a Chinese independent story in coming years, but currently it is not, as the supply chain is concentrated in China. And apart from the upstream side, if we look more on the midstream side, where the gigafactories are placed for these sodium ion batteries, it's mostly in China at the moment.
So, Dr. Agarwal, I mean, if as you've mentioned all of that, and then plus China already has its head start, then do you see China coming to dominate this sodium ion in much the same way as it has with lithium ion, even though, Western countries are trying to build alternative supply chains at the moment?
Currently, it seems like that China is going to be dominating, because if we look at ex-China players as well, there's only a handful of players that are working on sodium ion in US or in Europe. So it's initially going to be a Chinese story. It will really depend on how lower the price can get for these sodium ion batteries. One main advantage with sodium ion mass manufacturing is that it's kind of in a drop-in solution. So you can use your traditional lithium-ion gigafactory lines and convert those into sodium-ion lines. So you don't need a massive capex involvement. So once those upstream players, the hard carbon and the cathode players, or the production cost can be lowered, your gigafactories in US can easily, or Europe can be easily converted into sodium ion gigafactories as well. So it's a matter of having that technology maturity and getting the cost down.
So, okay, getting the cost down, that's one big factor. So, I mean, in the meantime, countries across East Asia and the West, everyone's trying to commercialize this technology. In a nutshell, what's going to ultimately decide who's going to win this race on sodium-ion battery?
So I think it's going to be how low the cost price of sodium ion is going to be, and how the lithium prices are going to be reacting as well. So this year, the whole attention is due to the lithium prices that are rising. So sodium ion, in terms of technology, have come a long way. So technologically, it's a mature technology. So cost and how the supply chain is going to be developing in future, and that's going to determine who's going to be the winner.
Right. In the meantime, we will be looking for CATL delivering its first sodium-ion storage systems in September. Well, it's been a very insightful, helpful talking to you. Thank you so very much for your time and thoughts. Dr. Varnika Agarwal, a senior battery research analyst from Benchmark Mineral Intelligence. Oh, China is set to launch its most technologically complex lunar mission to date in a search for something potentially vital to future life on the moon: water. Well, Chang'e 7 is due to lift off next week from the Wenchang space launch site in southern China. And the uncrewed spacecraft, named after a mythical Chinese goddess of the moon, will head for the lunar South Pole, one of the most extreme and least explored regions of the moon. Once in lunar orbit, it will use its array of scientific instruments aboard to determine its landing site. Now, scientists believe that craters that are permanently in the shadow at the lunar South Pole could preserve ancient water. Such deposits would be crucial for future lunar bases, as it could provide water and oxygen for astronauts. Chang'e 7 is part of China's wider space ambitions, and Beijing has a goal of landing its astronauts on the moon by 2030, with the eventual goal of establishing a permanent base. From lunar ice to sweltering heat, Japan's brutal summer is driving some men to shed more than just their jackets. They're turning to laser hair removal to stay cool and cut down on the sweat. And clinics say demand is growing fast. Well, for a 24-year-old office worker, Yuki Kubo, getting rid of body hair started as a New Year's resolution with friends. But as temperatures climbed, he found another benefit. Less hair, he says, means less sweat and discomfort, especially in areas prone to heat and humidity.
脇だったり VIO の部分が特に蒸れやすい部分なのかなと思っていて、そういうところの煩わしさがなくなったかなっていうところと、特に脇とかだと、例えば男性だったらタンクトップとか、オフショルダーじゃないな、このタンクトップっぽい服を着ることもあるかなと思うんですけど、そういう時にその脇がないっていうところで、より綺麗に見えるっていう部分もあると思うので。
Japan has endured increasingly intense summers, and this year is no exception. The heat is also changing what men wear. Tokyo's government has expanded its relaxed summer dress code, with some employees now allowed to wear shorts and T-shirts to work. And with more skin on show, hair removal is moving beyond the face.
最初であれば本当に立ち上げた頃ですね、11年前の頃になると、あんまり枠が完全に埋まるってことは想像なかった。ただ今で言うともう枠が埋まりすぎて予約がちょっと取りにくくなるくらいのお客様の数が増えていると。
Well, I hope you've enjoyed this Friday's edition of East Asia Tonight. If you need headlines, head to cna.asia and find us on all our socials, including Facebook, YouTube, and X. Thanks for watching and have a great weekend. See you on Monday.